90%. That's how much of the water that keeps Las Vegas alive comes from a single, shrinking source. A single lake, baking in the desert sun, supplied by a single, overtapped river. A city of 2.3 million residents, 40 million tourists a year, and a global reputation for impossible excess, all fundamentally dependent on a plumbing system that is visibly failing. Look at the images. The Hoover Dam, a monument of 20th century ambition, holding back a reservoir that looks like a ghost of itself. That white scar on the canyon walls, the infamous bathtub ring, isn't a stain. It's a measuring stick, a high watermark of a past that will never return. And every single day, the water level drops a little lower. The question isn't whether Las Vegas has a water problem. The problem is written in mineral deposits across hundreds of miles of shoreline. The real question is one of time. How long can a city like this, a fantasy of light and water in the middle of the Mojave Desert, actually survive when the numbers are this brutal? The data doesn't lie, and the story it tells is one of a city running out of time. Caught between its own remarkable ingenuity and a catastrophe that was set in motion a full century ago. The city is a world leader in urban water conservation. It recycles nearly every drop of indoor water, hires water police to hunt down sprinkler runoff, and has paid residents to tear out 500 million square feet of ornamental grass. And yet, none of it may be enough. Because the problem isn't just in Las Vegas. The problem is 300 miles upstream at a place called Glen Canyon Dam. That dam holds back Lake Powell, America's second largest reservoir. Or what's left of it. Today, Lake Powell sits at just 26% of its capacity. A recent, supposedly record-breaking snowpack in the Rockies barely slowed the decline. The inflow was just 34% of average. According to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's own projections from May of 2026, Lake Powell is on a terrifying trajectory. By December of 2026, it is forecast to hit 3,490 feet of elevation. That number is critical. It's not zero. It's the point of minimum power pool. The elevation where the water level drops below the intakes for Glen Canyon Dam's 8 massive hydroelectric turbines. For the first time in the dam's 63-year history, the electricity could just stop. But it doesn't end there. The projections continue downward, forecasting a new record low of 3,476 feet by March of 2027. And what happens at Powell doesn't stay at Powell. Lake Powell is the primary storage tank for the entire Upper Colorado River basin. Its job is to hold water and release a legally mandated amount downstream to Lake Mead, which is Las Vegas's tank. If Powell's water level gets too low, the releases to Mead are slashed. If its turbines shut down, the very mechanism for managing those releases becomes exponentially more complicated and risky. It's a cascade of failure, a domino effect engineered into the river system itself. A crisis at Powell automatically becomes an existential threat at Mead. And an existential threat at Mead is a death sentence for Las Vegas as we know it. So while Vegas has become a master of saving water within its own city limits, it can't save itself from the failures of the river it depends on. This is the great paradox of the city's survival. They are doing almost everything right, and they could still lose it all. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the city's relationship with water. It's not one of simple waste, despite the reputation. The Bellagio fountains, the Venetian canals, they are optical illusions. The fountains use non-potable groundwater, a closed loop that loses more to evaporation than consumption. The Strip's resorts collectively use only 3% of the region's water. The casinos are, bizarrely, models of efficiency. The real issue has always been the lawns. The emerald green grass of suburban homes, a transplanted dream of somewhere else, baking under the 110-degree sun. For decades, this cosmetic green was the city's biggest water sin, consuming more than half of its entire Colorado River allotment. So the Southern Nevada Water Authority, or SNWA, declared war, not on people, but on grass. Their turf removal program is one of the most aggressive and successful in the world. They literally pay homeowners and businesses by the square foot to tear out their lawns and replace them with desert landscaping. Since 1999, The program has ripped out over 215 million square feet of grass, saving billions of gallons of water. By 2027, all non-functional turf, the grass on street medians and in office parks that no one ever walks on, will be illegal. Gone, they went further. The SMWA recycles 99% of all water used indoors. Every drop that goes down a drain in a home, a hotel, a casino, it's all captured, sent to advanced treatment facilities, and then returned to Lake Mead. This system is so efficient that for every gallon of recycled water returned to the lake, Vegas is allowed to take another gallon out. It's a one-for-one credit. Because of this radical recycling and the war on grass, Las Vegas has slashed its total water consumption by nearly 30% since 2002, even while its population grew by almost 800,000 people. Per person, their water use has plummeted. They are using less water now than they did decades ago, with a much smaller population. On paper, it's a stunning success story, a model for the arid West. But here is the terrifying truth. All that effort, all that sacrifice, all that brilliant engineering, it's a rounding error. It's a city bailing water out of a boat with a teacup, while a hole the size of a truck door has been ripped in the hull. The fate of Las Vegas isn't being decided by sprinkler timers in Summerlin or by recycling plants in Henderson. It's being decided by a document signed in 1922. The Colorado River Compact. It's known as the Law of the River, and it is the original sin of this entire crisis. 100 years ago, representatives from 7 western states gathered to divide the water of the Colorado River. They based their math on what they believed was the river's average annual flow. The number they used was about 16.5 million acre-feet of water per year. An acre-foot is what it sounds like. Enough water to cover 1 acre of land with 1 foot of water. About 326,000 gallons. They took that 16.5 million acre-foot number and divided it up. 7.5 million for the upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico. 7.5 million for the lower basin Arizona, California, Nevada. Another 1.5 million was later promised to Mexico. That adds up to 16.5 million acre-feet. A neat, tidy division. There was only one problem. The number was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The measurements taken in the early 20th century, which formed the basis for the entire agreement, were taken during one of the wettest periods in the last 1,200 years. It was a historical fluke. Tree ring data later revealed the river's true, long-term average flow wasn't 16.5 million acre-feet. It was closer to 13.5 million, maybe even less. From the very moment it was signed, the Law of the River was promising away 3 million acre-feet of water per year that did not exist. For 100 years, the states have been writing checks that the river can't cash. For decades, the system got by because the big reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, acted as giant savings accounts. In wet years, they'd store the excess. In dry years, the states would draw down the savings. But the structural deficit, the simple fact that more water was promised than the river provides, was always there, compounding year after year. Then, in the year 2000, the American West entered the most severe megadrought in over a millennium. The dry years started multiplying, the savings accounts began to drain, and that century-old math error collided with the reality of a hotter, drier climate. The system began to fail. That is the crisis we see today. It's not just a drought. It's a century of overdraft meeting the new reality of climate change. And Las Vegas is at the epicenter of the collision. It has the smallest legal entitlement to the river of any of the states, but is the city most utterly dependent on it. And the institution built to manage this slow-motion disaster, the Hoover Dam itself, is now facing a future its creators never imagined. A future where the water drops so low that the dam itself can no longer do what it was built for. What happens when the power goes out before the water runs out? That question is no longer theoretical. The answer will define the very existence of America's most improbable city. The lights of the Las Vegas Strip, those iconic beacons against the desert sky, draw their energy from somewhere. That source is the Hoover Dam. For decades, the dam's turbines have spun, translating the massive force of the Colorado River's stored water into electricity. That electricity powers homes, businesses, and every slot machine and neon sign you see. But there's a critical threshold, a line in the sand, or rather, a line on the water surface, below which the turbines simply cannot operate. That line is known as minimum power pool. Just over 120 feet above the absolute minimum level at which the dam still holds water, but below which it ceases to generate power. Lake Powell, further upstream, hit this danger zone first. The Bureau of Reclamation's May 2026 24-month study projected precisely this problem. Lake Powell was already at 26% capacity in late May 2026. The prediction was stark. The reservoir would cross the 3,490-foot elevation mark, its own minimum power pool, in December 2026. If those projections hold, this would be the first time in its 63-year history. The water doesn't disappear all at once, of course. It's a continuous, observed, multi-year slide toward a moment where the dam itself remains structurally sound, but its primary function. Generating power simply stops. This isn't some distant theoretical problem. The power generated by Glen Canyon and Hoover dams isn't just for lighting up hotel suites. It manages the river. It regulates the flow for those 40 million people who depend on it downstream. When the turbines stop producing electricity, you're not just losing power. You're losing control over the entire system. And the terrifying part? The West loses the power long before it loses the water. Roughly 120 feet of water column, to be exact. That capacity difference changes everything. The cascading effect is immediate and brutal. This shift changes the operational dynamics of the entire Colorado River system, directly impacting Lake Mead and, by extension, Las Vegas. Consider what this means. The lights of the casinos, the air conditioning in every hotel room, the irrigation systems keeping golf courses green in a literal desert. All of it dependent on a power source that is, right now, actively being choked off by vanishing water. In 2026, Lake Powell was still projected to fall to a record low 3,476 feet by March 2027. This isn't just a number, it's a countdown. It's a physical manifestation of a system under unbearable stress, buckling under the weight of decades of overconsumption and the accelerating force of a changing climate. The implications for Las Vegas are direct and severe. If Glen Canyon Dam goes dark, the power grid across the entire Southwest becomes dramatically less stable. And if Hoover Dam follows, which it is entirely positioned to do, Las Vegas becomes a city in profound trouble. Imagine a summer day in Las Vegas, temperatures routinely hitting 110 or 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Now imagine that without reliable grid power, without air conditioning, without the constant hum of life support systems. The city as we know it simply cannot exist. This fragility isn't new. For decades, engineers and hydrologists warned about an over-allocated Colorado River, the 1922 Colorado River Compact, an agreement signed when the river was flowing much higher. Estimated annual flows at 16.4 million acre-feet. Actual flow over the last century proved closer to 13.5 million acre-feet annually. They allocated more water than the river actually carried, setting the stage for conflict and scarcity from the very beginning. Every state, every user, was promised water that fundamentally wasn't there. This wasn't a mistake due to lack of foresight. It was a political calculation. The drafters of the compact used an abnormally wet period in the river's history as their baseline, essentially building a water budget on inflated projections. They overpromised, and a century of growth, particularly in places like Las Vegas, built an entire economic and social structure on that illusion. That original sin, the 1922 Colorado River Compact, is the massive overdraft that now feeds this crisis. Every year, we take more than the river gives. Every year, the debt piles higher. The drought that has gripped the American Southwest isn't an anomaly. It's the inevitable culmination of this flawed system meeting a new, harsher climate reality. The term megadrought is thrown around casually, but it fails to capture the true scale of the problem. This isn't just a few dry years. Tree ring data indicates this drought is the worst in at least 1,200 years. This isn't a cyclical downturn. It's a fundamental shift in precipitation patterns and temperature, exacerbated by climate change. For a region already operating on a deficit, this shift is catastrophic. Lake Mead, the reservoir directly supplying the majority of Las Vegas's water, is in a precarious situation itself. It has been steadily dropping for years. In the early 2000s, it was full. Today, it's a fraction of that. Massive white rings, like a bathtub stain, mark the former shoreline, showing where the water used to be. These bathtub rings are hundreds of feet high in some places, a stark visual representation of billions of gallons of water gone. These rings are not simply aesthetic, they are indicators of a crisis. When a lake drops to such levels, several things happen simultaneously. The immediate concern is water supply. Las Vegas withdraws its water through intake pipes that extend deep into Lake Mead. As the water level falls, these pipes can be exposed. To mitigate this, new, deeper intake pipes, straws, have been constructed at immense cost. The Southern Nevada Water Authority spent hundreds of millions of dollars drilling a third straw deep into the lake bed, completed in 2015. This was a desperate bid to ensure the city could continue to draw water even if the lake dropped to historically low levels. They were building a contingency plan for a crisis that was already materializing. But even with these deeper straws, the quality of the remaining water changes. As the lake shrinks, the water becomes warmer and more concentrated with minerals. This demands more energy and resources for treatment before it's safe to drink. This isn't just about having water, it's about having usable water, at a cost that doesn't become prohibitive. The more expensive it is to treat, the higher the cost borne by the residents and businesses of Las Vegas. Is there a point where the cost of sustaining a desert oasis outweighs its perceived value? The receding waters of Lake Mead also reveal secrets long buried. Entire towns inundated when the lake was created are now re-emerging. Ghost towns like St. Thomas, once a vibrant Mormon settlement submerged in the 1930s, are now accessible on foot. These are eerie reminders of the power of water, both its life-giving and its destructive potential. But these revelations are also public spectacles, tourist attractions that unfortunately highlight the very crisis they represent. People come to see the ruins, but they're seeing the ruins of the lake itself. The ecosystem of the lake also suffers profoundly. Fish populations decline, affecting recreational fishing and the entire food web. Introduced species struggle, while others thrive in the changed conditions, further altering the delicate balance. The natural environment around the lake, once teeming with life supported by the larger body of water, becomes arid, dusty, and barren. This ecological collapse might seem secondary to human concerns, but it signifies a broader imbalance, a permanent scar on the landscape. Another unforeseen consequence of low lake levels is the risk to the dam itself. While Hoover Dam is a monumental feat of engineering designed to withstand immense pressure, the shifting water levels introduce different stresses. When the water level is consistently low, the pressure on the dam changes, while the dam is still structurally sound. Engineers study the long-term effects of extreme fluctuations. The stability of the bedrock, the integrity of the concrete, these are continuously monitored because failure, even partial failure, would be unthinkable. The Colorado River system, a lifeline for 7 states, is a complex network of dams, reservoirs, canals, and agreements. Decisions made in one part of the basin ripple across the entire system. When Lake Powell's levels drop, it impacts Lake Mead. When California, Arizona, or Nevada take their allocated water, it impacts the others. This interdependency means there's no easy fix, no quick solution that benefits everyone equally. Every proposed solution becomes a battleground. Las Vegas, for all its dazzling allure, operates on borrowed time, or more accurately, borrowed water. Its very existence is a gamble against the arid realities of its geography. When the city was founded, its position as a major population center seemed absurd. Yet it thrived, defying all ecological logic, pulling resources from distant mountains and rivers. It became a monument to human ingenuity, wealth, and denial. Now, the bill for that denial is coming due. The numbers don't lie. The water levels are dropping, the power is at risk, and the future of America's most improbable city hangs in the balance. The question isn't whether it can last. but how much longer its intricate systems can stave off the inevitable reckoning. And yet, every time the conversation turns to these drastic, last-ditch engineering projects, we miss the point. The third intake straw, officially known as Intake No. 3, is a modern marvel of engineering. It cost the Southern Nevada Water Authority over $817 million to build. It's a 3-mile-long, 20-foot diameter concrete tunnel drilled under the lake bed, terminating in an intake structure that sits at an elevation of 860 feet. That's 190 feet lower than the original intakes. It was a Herculean effort designed to do one thing: suck water out of a dying lake long after it should have been impossible. It's a lifeline, yes, but it's a lifeline thrown to a man who is not just drowning, but being swept over a waterfall. It doesn't solve the problem. It just allows Las Vegas to watch the catastrophe unfold from a slightly better position than its neighbors. This is the grim hierarchy of failure on the Colorado River. The system wasn't designed to fall apart all at once. It was designed to crumble in stages. And Las Vegas, ironically, is one of the last to feel the direct impact of thirst. The first victim isn't water supply, it's power. Hoover Dam's turbines are rated to operate down to a lake elevation of 1,050 feet. Below that, they can still generate some power, but output becomes erratic and inefficient. The cavitation, the formation of destructive bubbles from the pressure change, begins to tear the turbines apart. The grid operators who depend on Hoover's steady, predictable power for millions of people across the Southwest are forced to find it somewhere else, almost certainly from more expensive and less clean sources. The lights on the Vegas Strip might stay on, but the cost to keep them burning skyrockets. The reliable, cheap hydropower that enabled the growth of the entire region simply vanishes. Then comes the next stage of the collapse. At 950 feet, the upper intakes that serve the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Central Arizona Project go dry. This is the moment the crisis becomes a full-blown political war. Suddenly, 40 million people's water supply hangs in the balance, and Las Vegas is still pumping thanks to its $817 million straw sitting deeper in the puddle. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the political fury from Los Angeles and Phoenix as they are forced into draconian rationing, their agricultural industries decimated. While the fountains at the Bellagio are still, somehow, running, it creates a scenario where Nevada, the state with the smallest legal claim to the river's water, is the last one able to physically take it. That situation is not politically sustainable for a week, let alone the years it would take for the lake to recover, if it ever could. This leads us to the final, terrifying number, the one that engineers and water managers almost never say out loud: 895 feet. That's the elevation of Dead Pool. At this level, the water is too low to pass through Hoover Dam's penstocks at all. The river stops. Nothing gets downstream to the farmers, the cities, the tribes, or to Mexico, which has a legal treaty right to that water. At 895 feet, the Colorado River as a managed system ceases to exist. And Intake No. 3, for all its technological brilliance, is sitting at 860 feet. It could, in theory, continue to pump what's left in the rapidly shrinking, stagnant puddle behind the dam. But the dam itself, the colossal structure that defines the entire American Southwest, would have become nothing more than a concrete plug, a tombstone for a dead river. So what then? The brochures for the future are filled with fantasy solutions. Desalination is the most common one. Just build massive plants on the California coast and pipe the water to Vegas. It sounds simple. It is anything but. The cost would be astronomical, numbering in the tens, if not hundreds, of billions of dollars. The energy required to push that much water over several mountain ranges would be staggering. A cruel irony given that Hoover Dam would have already failed. And then there's the brine, the hypersaline sludge left over from the process, which has to be dumped somewhere, often with devastating consequences for marine ecosystems. California can barely get a single large desalination plant approved for its own coastal cities. The idea that it would build a network of them to save Las Vegas is a pipe dream. Another fantasy is the Big Pipe, the idea of diverting water from a water-rich river system like the Missouri or the Mississippi and piping it across the continent. Put aside the engineering challenge, which would dwarf any construction project in human history. The political reality makes it impossible. The states you would be taking water from are not immune to drought. The Mississippi River has faced its own historic lows in recent years, snarling barge traffic and threatening water supplies. Telling a farmer in Missouri that their water is being sent to fill swimming pools in Las Vegas is a declaration of political war. It will never happen. The real future, the one nobody wants to talk about, has a much quieter, more chilling name: managed retreat. It won't be a sudden, dramatic evacuation like in a disaster movie. There won't be convoys of cars fleeing into the desert. It will be a slow, grinding economic collapse. It starts when the big corporations, the data centers, the tech companies that Vegas has been trying so hard to attract, look at the water projections and decide not to build or expand there. It continues when insurance companies stop writing policies for new developments. It accelerates when the bond rating for the city and state gets downgraded because of the existential risk to its water supply, making it more expensive to borrow money for everything. Then the people start to leave, not all at once, but in a steady trickle. They leave because their construction job disappeared. They leave because the restaurant they worked at closed. They leave because the value of their home has plummeted and they see no future. The city doesn't die with a bang, it withers. The tax base shrinks, forcing cuts to city services. The vibrant, growing metropolis begins to contract, leaving behind a ghost of its former self. The sprawling suburbs on the edge of the valley become the first modern American ghost towns of the climate era. The dazzling lights of the Strip might be the last thing to go out, a final, defiant beacon in a shrinking city. But the foundation that supports them will have long since crumbled to dust. In the end, Las Vegas was a bet. It was a bet that a city could be conjured from nothing in one of the most inhospitable places on the continent. It was a bet that human engineering could indefinitely hold back the forces of nature. For a century, that bet paid off spectacularly. But the city was playing against the house, and in the desert, the house is the desert itself. The house always wins. The numbers on the side of Lake Mead, those white bathtub rings, are the casino's chips being raked off the table. Every foot the lake drops is a losing hand. The third straw isn't a winning strategy. It's the desperate act of a gambler pushing their last few chips into the pot, praying for a miracle card on the river. But on this river, the cards have already been dealt. The water is gone.